Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking those fascinating, completely amoral rules of society that really dictate who rises to the top and, well, who gets crushed along the way. If you've ever had that sneaking suspicion that there's some hidden playbook to success that nobody bothered to share with you, yeah, you are definitely in the right place.
All right, let's jump right into this masterclass. The source material we're looking at takes literally 3,000 years of human history and boils it down to 48 key rules. And you know, what really struck me reading through this is its core, honestly, kind of uncomfortable premise. We have to look at power not as inherently good or evil, but simply as a game. Power is amoral. Once you actually have it, sure, you can choose how to use it, but just waving it off as bad or pretending you're somehow above it all, that's just a foolish move.
To really master this game, we've got to fundamentally shift our perspective. Think about it. If the world is basically a giant scheming court, trying to just opt out doesn't make you morally superior. It just leaves you incredibly vulnerable as a pawn. Now, obviously, today's world demands that everything looks super fair and democratic. But if you play strictly by those civilized rules, you are absolutely going to get outmaneuvered by the people who know how the game is actually played.
To make this incredibly dense playbook a bit more digestible, we're going to group these laws into four main areas. First, mastering your image. Second, navigating friends and foes. Third, controlling the board. And finally, the price of power.
So, let's kick things off with part 1, mastering your image through controlling perception. It's really your first line of defense and, honestly, your most potent weapon. Starting off with Law 1, never outshine the master. Listen, it is absolutely crucial that you never make your superiors feel insecure, because if you do, they will find a way to replace you in a heartbeat. Instead of showing off just how brilliant you are in that next big meeting, your job is to make those above you seem smarter. Ask for their advice, credit your best ideas to their mentorship, and just let them soak up the limelight. Think of it as a basic corporate survival mechanism. If the boss feels threatened by you, your head is going to be the very first one on the chopping block.
And that perfectly sets up Law 4. Always say less than necessary. Have you ever noticed how truly powerful people tend to, well, say almost nothing? When you give these short, vague answers, it actually makes people really uncomfortable. They'll naturally start babbling just to fill the silence, and usually they end up giving away valuable information in the process. Plus, let's be real. The more words coming out of your mouth, the higher the chances you're going to accidentally say something completely foolish.
Which ties right into Law 5, protecting your reputation at all costs. Think of your reputation as your calling card. If you're known to be flawlessly honest, you know what? It becomes ridiculously easy to get away with a little deception later on. On the flip side, if you cultivate this image of being totally ruthless, people are naturally going to be terrified to cross you. But if that image gets damaged, you suddenly become incredibly vulnerable to attacks from literally every angle.
Now, because everything in this world is judged by appearances, Law 6 tells us you must become an attention magnet. You do not want to fade into the background and become inconsequential. The text essentially says it's better to be slandered and attacked than to just be ignored. How do you do this? You can surround yourself with sensational people, or better yet, build this air of mystery around yourself. Mystery stimulates the imagination, right? It makes you seem way more intriguing and, by extension, way more powerful.
Moving on to part 2, friends and foes flipping the script. Now, what I found really fascinating here is how this material just completely upends everything we've been taught about handling the people closest to us. Case in point, instead of hiring your buddies, Law 2 argues you should always hire for competence. Working with friends actually limits your power because maintaining professional distance becomes basically impossible. Astonishingly, the strategy here advises you to actively use your enemies. If you can manage to win over a former rival, they will be fiercely loyal simply because they have so much more to prove than a comfortable friend ever would. It sounds totally counterintuitive, I know, but historically, it really works.
Then we hit Law 10, which drops a pretty harsh but practical reality on us. Emotional states are infectious. You have to stay away from people who constantly bring misfortune upon themselves through toxic attitudes because their misery, it will drag you right down with them. It's like a drowning person. If you get too close, they're going to pull you under in their panic. You want to strictly associate with the happy and the successful.
And this naturally brings us to Law 7. This one is all about tapping into the hard work and wisdom of other people so you can save your own energy while building up your power base. The world is essentially divided into hunters and prey, and you are not going to get far doing all the heavy lifting yourself. But a quick caveat from the text here, if your own power isn't fully established yet, only take credit for the work of those below you and make sure you always pass credit up to those above you.
All right, let's shift into part 3, controlling the board and maneuvering people. This is the fun part, where we take that carefully crafted image we've been talking about and actually use it to play the game.
That brings us straight to Law 8, making people come to you. Look, if you're constantly just reacting to what other people do, you are bleeding energy, and you're losing the game. True power lies in forcing your opponent to drop their plans and start acting on your terms. When you hold your ground and make them cross the distance to get to you, you instantly shift that balance of power right into your own lap.
So how do you do that? Well, by mastering your own emotions and following a really specific sequence: bait, lure, and attack. First, you bait them. Dangle some attractive potential gains in front of them, or even intentionally provoke them into anger. Second, you lure them into your own territory, for whatever meetings or negotiations are happening. And finally, you attack on your terms. While they're acting out of pure impulse, you're just sitting there calm, collected, and in complete control.
You can take that control even further by treating things like honesty and generosity as calculated, clinical tools. Think of Law 3 like deploying a smoke screen. Maybe it's a sudden noble gesture, or just an unreadable poker face that distracts people just enough to make them drop their guard. Combine that with Law 12, which is a perfectly timed act of selective generosity, and you can disarm even the most paranoid adversary. It is wonderfully Machiavellian.
Now, when you inevitably face opposition, remember Law 9, never, ever rely on verbal arguments. Getting a verbal victory is temporary at best, and honestly, it usually just breeds this surface-level resentment anyway. Instead, prove your point cleanly through your actions. Demonstrate your ideas indirectly. That way, you win the battle without actually offending anyone.
And finally, for this section, when you need a favor or you're trying to build an alliance, Law 13 dictates that you must appeal purely to their self-interest. Seriously, forget about your own needs or whatever noble cause you're championing. Ask yourself, what's in it for them? Play on their everyday realities or even play into their desire to feel superior to you. If they can see a clear, tangible benefit for themselves, they're going to jump at the chance to support you.
Which brings us to the end, part 4, the price of power, the ultimate paradox. Because as you might guess, gaining this kind of power demands some very specific sacrifices. Let's look at Law 11, which states that the greater people's need is for your unique skills, the greater your power and freedom will be. You essentially want to weave yourself into the very fabric of their success so deeply that they just literally cannot function without you. The trick here? Never teach others so much that they can suddenly manage without your specific talents.
But here is the catch, and honestly, this perfectly illustrates the ultimate paradox of all these laws. By so closely intertwining your fate with others to ensure they can't cut you off, maybe because you have those unique skills, or maybe because you know all their secrets, you inherently become somewhat dependent on them too. You are tied to them just as tightly as they are tied to you. And that mutual entanglement, that is the true, unavoidable price of power.
So now that you understand the pragmatic, completely unwritten rules of this giant scheming court, the question is, how are you going to choose to use this knowledge in your own life? Are you going to master your image, carefully navigate those alliances, and actively control the board, or will you just remain totally unaware of this invisible game being played all around you every single day? The choice, as always, is completely up to you. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.